The year is 1941. The location is not a city of marble and glass, nor a seat of power, but the vast, silent, and often unforgiving landscape of the Ukrainian borderlands. Our focus is not on generals or massive tank formations, but on a man named Vasily Petrov and the quiet patch of earth he called home. He was a farmer, unremarkable in the grand sweep of history, yet history was about to demand everything from him. Vasily's life was measured in seasons, not skirmishes. The deep, rich Chernozem soil, the cyclical rhythm of planting and harvest. This was his universe. He knew the land, the way a lover knows a face, the whispering birch forests, the sudden sharp drop of the ravines, the hidden streams where the ice lingered longest. The tools of his trade were the plough and the sickle, not the rifle. His world was peace, a profound, almost stubborn silence that seemed to defy the madness unfolding elsewhere in Europe. But the silence was a lie. The distant thunder of war, which for years had seemed a conflict of strangers in faraway lands, was rolling inexorably eastward. The Soviet Union, lulled into a treacherous sense of security by a non-aggression pact, was about to be blindsided by the most ambitious and brutal military offensive ever conceived, Operation Barbarossa. In the command bunkers of the Wehrmacht, the maps showed the Ostfront, the Eastern Front, as a massive, almost limitless expanse, ripe for conquest. The German plan was one of staggering speed, a blitzkrieg designed not just to win battles, but to shatter an entire ideology, an entire nation, before the cruel winter could set in. They moved with the confidence of conquerors. They believed the Soviet defense would collapse like a house of cards. What they did not factor in was the infinite complexity of the land itself, and the ferocity of the human spirit when pushed past the point of endurance. For Vasily, the war was an abstract horror until the summer of 1941. On a Tuesday morning, a day no different from any other, the vanguard of a German motorized division swept through his district. These were not seasoned veterans, but young men, flushed with victory, their eyes still holding the excitement of the initial charge. They saw a quiet, insignificant farmstead. They saw a soft target. Irony is the first casualty of war, and here it was delivered with brutal efficiency. The men who paused to commit a casual, horrifying atrocity on the Petrov family farm, a crime of opportunity and cruelty, had no way of knowing that they were not merely killing a farmer's family. They were forging a ghost. The details of that morning, drawn from later historical testimony, are brief and devastating. A scouting unit, a miscommunication, a sudden, senseless act of violence. The fire, the smoke, the silence that followed was not the peaceful silence Vasily knew. It was a vacuum, a crushing, terrifying emptiness. When Vasily returned from the fields, he found not a home, but a pyre. His wife, his children, reduced to dust and memory. In that moment the farmer died, and something else was born. It was not a soldier molded by barracks and drill sergeants. It was a pure, cold engine of vengeance, calibrated by grief. His training came not from a manual, but from a lifetime spent in observation, of the wind, of the animals, of the infinite patience required to wait for a harvest. He did not rush to join the nearest unit. He simply walked into the woods, taking the only rifle he owned, a worn-out Mosin Nagant M9130, a relic compared to the precision instruments of the German snipers, and began to hunt. The German High Command was fixated on the major strategic objectives: Kyiv, Leningrad, Moscow. They paid little attention to the mounting, low-grade casualties reported from their flanks. A missing scout here, a dead officer there, always far from the main road, always with a single, devastating headshot. They dismissed it as partisan activity, annoying, but manageable. What they failed to understand was that the man now targeting them was not fighting for the Soviet Union, but for his own private, blood-soaked ledger. He was invisible because he was the land. He moved not like a man, but like the shadow of a cloud passing over the fields, leaving behind only the chilling evidence of his passage. The transformation was absolute. Vasily, the quiet cultivator of life, had become Vasily, the quiet reaper of death. And for the men of the Wehrmacht advancing across the Russian plain, The ground was about to become not a path to glory, but a terrifying silent firing range, where the rules of engagement were written by one man, and the only certainty was the crack of a rifle they would never hear before their world went dark. This is just the beginning of Vasily's relentless path. To witness his evolution from a grieving farmer to the most feared shadow on the Eastern Front, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss how one man changed the calculus of war. The true measure of a sniper is not his kill count, but his invisibility. Vasily Petrov, the newly minted hunter, began his campaign under the perfect cover of confusion and desperation that defined the early days of the German invasion. While the Red Army was reeling, millions captured, massive equipment losses, entire fronts collapsing, Vasily found his niche in the chaos. His battlefield was the no-man's land between the crumbling Soviet line and the rapidly advancing German armored columns. His initial rifle, the Mosin Nagant M9130, was a reflection of the desperate times. It was a robust, simple, and often crude bolt-action weapon, firing the heavy 7.62 54mm cartridge. It was a workhorse, not a precision instrument. Early models lacked telescopic sights, forcing Vasily to rely on iron sights and the phenomenal eyesight he had developed tracking game and scanning his expansive fields. His engagement distances were initially shorter, more intimate, relying on absolute stealth and cunning fieldcraft. "We laughed at the Russian rifle at first," recalled Oberleutnant Klaus Richter in his memoirs. "The bolt was heavy, the stock was rough. Our K98K was poetry by comparison. But then the reports started. Officers, radio operators, machine gunners, always the critical personnel, removed by a single clean shot, never the same spot twice. It stopped being funny." Vasily's genius lay in his application of agricultural knowledge to military tactics. A farmer understands soil, he understands drainage, contours, and the way light and shadow play across terrain at different times of the day. A veteran soldier learns to spot a camouflage net. A farmer knows where a shadow shouldn't be. He adapted the hollow, frozen ruts of cart tracks for low crawls, used the density variations in tall grain fields to mask his forward movement, and understood the exact moment of midday heat shimmer that would momentarily obscure a distant target. He learned to manage the most significant technical challenge of his early rifle, muzzle flash and smoke. The M9130 produced a noticeable, telltale flash upon discharge. To mitigate this, Vasily sought positions with dense foliage, firing from deep within the tree line, or even more daringly, from partially burned-out structures, where the natural soot and debris would help dissipate the smoke signature. His initial strategy was simple: target the command structure. The loss of a single platoon leader could slow a company. The loss of a key artillery spotter could render a whole battery blind. The Germans, while initially dismissive, began to notice a pattern of tactical decapitation. They were dealing with a force that seemed to violate the basic laws of engagement. This wasn't indiscriminate fire. It was selective, surgical, and deeply demoralizing. The Soviet military doctrine began to recognize the immense value of these highly effective lone operators. They began forming specialized sniper schools, one of which Vasily, already a legend in the local detachments, was soon directed to attend. In the late summer of 1942, Vasily was finally equipped with the tool that would elevate him from a skilled hunter to a mythical assassin, the Mosin Nagant M9130 PU sniper variant. The PU scope was a modest 3.5x power, but it was a revelation. It offered the precision to engage targets at 600 meters or more, distances previously unthinkable with iron sights. The optical precision now matched his innate fieldcraft. This was the moment his reputation began to outpace his reality. The sheer scale of the conflict provided the perfect theater. The Wehrmacht was pushing relentlessly towards Stalingrad. In this colossal grinder of urban and steppe warfare, casualty figures were so massive that Vasily's increasing tally, which would eventually reach into the hundreds, was initially a mere statistical blip. But for the German frontline soldier, the terror was palpable and immediate. They gave him a name: the Ghost. When the Ghost was active, you felt it, recounted a German Gefreiter captured near the Don River. It wasn't artillery. It wasn't a charge. It was absolute silence, followed by a wet, sickening thud. You looked around, but there was nothing. The fear wasn't about dying. It was about knowing you were already sighted, already chosen, and there was nothing you could do but wait for the inevitable whisper of the bullet. The terror was amplified by Vasily's meticulous methods. Never shoot the same target twice if another critical target is visible, and always move after the second shot. He created a psychological battlefield where the Germans were constantly scanning the horizon, not for an army, but for an invisible pinprick of light reflecting off glass, or the slight movement of dry grass. He had weaponized the simplest elements of nature, the chill of the evening air, the morning fog, the camouflage of a single, half-submerged log. The farmer had turned the entire Eastern Front into a vast, silent trap. By late 1942, Vasily Petrov's activities were no longer localized skirmishes. They were a significant strategic problem for the Wehrmacht. The cumulative loss of NCOs, radio operators, and forward observers began to severely compromise German tactical cohesion, especially in the tight, brutal engagements around key urban areas. The High Command realized they were facing not a partisan, but a professional, an invisible force whose skills bordered on the legendary. The German response was measured and deadly. They deployed their own elite specialists, the Wehrmacht and SS Scharfschützen. This was the beginning of the counter-sniper war, a private shadow conflict fought between individuals, often lasting days, across hundreds of meters of scorched earth. Into this theater of silent death was brought Major Erwin König, a composite character representing the historical reality of German counter-sniper efforts. König was a legend in his own right, a product of rigorous training, equipped with the superior Kar-98K rifle fitted with high-quality Zeiss or Hensoldt telescopic sights, offering clarity and magnification that often surpassed the Soviet optics. König's reputation preceded him. He specialized in hunting the hunters, his methods cold, scientific, and absolutely ruthless. The stage for their inevitable confrontation was the ruined landscape of a major city on the Eastern Front. The collapsed factories and shell-pocked apartment blocks provided the perfect, three-dimensional maze for a sniper duel. Unlike the open steppe where concealment was everything, here, the game was about deception and patience. Vasily, now officially recognized as a hero of the Soviet Union in the making, was aware of König's arrival. The presence of a superior German marksman was instantly detectable by the sudden cessation of Soviet sniper casualties, a pause that signaled a systematic clearing operation. The narrative tension built as Vasily realized his nemesis was not a man to be trifled with, but a mind trained to anticipate his every move. The duel became a chilling exhibition of tradecraft. Vasily would use the classic decoy technique, placing a helmet or a piece of rubble to draw fire, allowing him to identify König's position by observing the bullet impact and the direction of the sound. König, in turn, learned to hold fire, watching the decoy for days, waiting for the slight movement of the feeder, the spotter or assistant who manipulated the bait. The air between the positions felt thick, stated an observer's historical account. It wasn't just noise, it was pressure. Two men, miles apart, locked in a battle of wills. Every piece of glass, every shard of brick, every frozen puddle became a possible lens or mirror. They were mapping each other's minds, not the terrain. Vasily's understanding of the battlefield gave him the edge. König was a product of European hunting tradition. Vasily was the product of survival. Vasily would exploit the urban echo, timing his shots with the concussive sound of distant artillery or mortar fire to mask the sharp crack of his rifle, a technical feat that minimized the chance of range estimation by the enemy. He would even use the local rodent population, setting out food near a decoy, knowing that any movement, however slight, would eventually draw the Germans' impatient eye. The emotional toll was immense. For Vasily, this was not just a mission. It was a personal vendetta against the entire German war machine, embodied now in one equally deadly man. König represented the systematic violence that had destroyed his family. The tension built to a silent crescendo over a week of near misses, shattered stone, and agonizing silence. The climax arrived near a half-collapsed water tower. Vasily, Through meticulous observation of the angle of the sun and the presence of a single unusual patch of undisturbed dust, deduced Koenig's near-perfect, camouflaged firing position in a distant air duct. He knew he could not risk a shot from his own position, which was likely being watched. Instead, Vasily used the ultimate psychological weapon, patience and misdirection. He placed his most experienced spotter, Nikolai, with a fake rifle and a crude camouflage setup in an exposed position. Then, Vasily crawled for 5 hours, crossing the most dangerous stretch of ground to an entirely unexpected flank. When Koenig finally took the bait and fired a single perfect shot at the exposed spotter, which was just a mannequin, Vasily had a split second, an unprecedented window of opportunity. The puff of Koenig's muzzle flash, momentarily exposed, was his death warrant. Vasily's single, perfectly aimed shot ended the duel, eliminating the most formidable threat to the Soviet sniper corps. The body of the German major was retrieved and displayed, a massive propaganda victory that instantly transformed the narrative. The farmer, the quiet ghost of the frontier, had not just survived. He had defeated the best the enemy had to offer. The elimination of the German counter-sniper ace, Major Koenig, was not just a tactical victory for Vasily Petrov. It was a profound propaganda triumph for the entire Soviet war effort. It proved that the individual, the common man fighting for his land, could defeat the highly trained, scientifically equipped elite of the Wehrmacht. The Battle of the Shadows was instantly politicized. Suddenly, Vasily Petrov was no longer just a ghost. He was a symbol. The Soviet press and radio stations, spearheaded by the omnipresent hand of political commissars, transformed the grieving farmer into the Avenger of the People, a living embodiment of Soviet resistance. Posters featuring a stern, determined Vasily with his Mosin Nagant appeared across the front, boosting the morale of the shattered Red Army units. This transformation, from private vendetta to public symbol, had immediate strategic consequences. The Germans, already reeling from losses, now had to contend with a new, debilitating psychological weapon, the legend. The truth became less important than the rumor, a captured German lieutenant explained during interrogation. We didn't know how many men he had killed, 50, 100, 1,000. But every time a man was lost to a sniper, it was Vasily. Every strange noise was Vasily. The fear was paralyzing. It made us hesitant. You hesitated to light a cigarette, hesitant to check a map, hesitant to stand up in a trench. That hesitation was the advantage the Russians needed. The psychology of fear became a tangible asset. In combat, milliseconds matter. The German soldier's conscious or subconscious pause, the glance over the shoulder, the ducking reflex, was enough to delay the deployment of machine guns, slow the signaling of artillery, or break the momentum of a frontal assault. Vasily's legend weaponized the natural human instinct for self-preservation, turning it against the enemy. Simultaneously, the war had transitioned from an encounter of armies to a contest of industrial scale. Vasily's sniper success was inextricably linked to the Soviet Union's ability to mass-produce the tools of war. Statistics from this period are staggering, illustrating the sheer logistical effort involved. The production of the Mosin Nagant rifle, though a basic design, reached incredible peaks, flooding the front with reliable, if unrefined, weapons. The deployment of specialized sniper training schools dramatically increased. These schools replicated Vasily's fieldcraft and patience, teaching thousands of new recruits the art of the hidden kill. The sniper corps expanded exponentially, creating hundreds of ghosts who replicated Vasily's tactics. His personal actions had effectively launched an industrial-scale tactical shift. The 7.62 54mm ammunition, heavy and powerful, was churned out in millions of rounds, ensuring that the supply chain could keep up with the demands of precision warfare. Vasily's personal tally of confirmed kills continued to climb, a statistic meticulously logged by the political officers for maximum propaganda value. Yet the man himself remained a quiet enigma. He had trained other snipers, sharing the wisdom of the farmer. The best cover is the one you do not need to build, but the one you find. His apprentices became known for their ability to blend into the most unassuming landscapes. One of his defining tactics was the wolf pack, or sixes approach. A team of 6 snipers, spaced widely apart, targeting a single sector. They would coordinate their shots to create a continuous, invisible wave of fire. The Germans could never pinpoint the origin of the shots, believing they were facing one miraculous, omnipresent marksman, the Ghost. "We were hunting for a singular needle in a vast haystack," a German military analyst noted. But they were sending hundreds of needles. Petrov was a master, but his greatest contribution was showing that this kind of individualized warfare could be taught and deployed on an industrial scale. He made every Russian soldier believe they could be a sniper. But there was a deeper, colder irony at play. The farmer who had sought vengeance for his personal losses was now a cog in a massive total war machine, his sorrow weaponized by a political regime that cared little for individual grief. Vasily was celebrated, yet profoundly isolated. His purpose was defined by the very violence he abhorred. The silence of the night, once the comforting sound of his land, was now merely the waiting period before the next cold, necessary shot. The man who hunted for justice was now hunted for his fame, and the weight of hundreds of deaths pressed down on the conscience of the quiet farmer. As the war progressed, the Eastern Front solidified into a brutal contest of attrition. The Germans, having identified the sniper threat as a critical tactical issue, poured resources into counter-technologies. This marked a shift in Vasily's operational environment, forcing him to adapt not just to men, but to sophisticated technology designed to betray him. The primary German countermeasure was the systematic use of powerful observation optics and the introduction of tracer ammunition for ranging and suppression. They also began using specialized sniper detection teams, employing early forms of stereo telescopes to pinpoint subtle muzzle flashes, heat signatures, or scope reflections. For Vasily, the challenge moved from simple concealment to complex deception. He had to evolve his tradecraft far beyond the basics of camouflage. 1. Scope reflection. Management. The telltale glint of a telescopic sight was a death sentence. Vasily adopted the use of a simple field-expedient sunshade, often a tube of canvas or cardboard, to extend the scope's length and prevent direct light from reflecting off the lens. More critically, he began using a double position strategy, observing from one hidden spot and only shifting his rifle to a second, tightly concealed firing port at the last possible moment. 2. Muzzle blast suppression. While true silencers were rare and ineffective for powerful rifles like the Mosin Nagant, Vasily perfected the technique of firing through loose materials. Firing through a screen of thin brush, a perforated wall, or even a sheet of thick canvas helped to momentarily disperse the muzzle flash and slightly dull the sharp crack of the supersonic bullet. 3. Elevation and angle. Vasily sought the high ground, not for visibility, but for its tactical advantage in confusing enemy spotters. Firing down from a dilapidated rooftop or an elevated embankment meant the bullet's impact, sound, and trajectory were distorted. The sound waves would often bounce off the ground or surrounding structures, making range estimation extremely difficult for the German observer. "We had the best glass, the Zeiss, the finest optics," recalled a German artillery spotter. But the Russians' angles were wrong. The sound would hit us from the left, but the impact was always low and far to the right. It was like he was shooting from the air, or the ground itself was misfiring the bullet. He was weaponizing physics. A key development in this technological adaptation was Vasily's collaboration with Soviet engineers to refine the standard issue 7.62 54 mm ammunition. While he preferred the heavier, more stable LPS, light projectile steel core rounds for range, he began experimenting with match-grade hand-loaded cartridges when available. These specially prepared rounds offered unparalleled consistency in powder charge and bullet seeding, translating directly to tighter groups and greater precision at extreme ranges, often 800 meters or more. This pursuit of microscopic consistency reflected his farmer's obsession with meticulous control over his environment. The German response to the high-ground, silent-fire tactic was the deployment of anti-sniper armor units, tanks and armored cars moving in advance of infantry, specifically designed to suppress known sniper positions with concentrated machine gun and coaxial cannon fire. This was a costly admission of defeat. The Germans were forced to dedicate heavy armor simply to counter a single infantryman. Vasily's most dramatic adaptation came during a winter battle for a railway hub. Recognizing the futility of traditional camouflage against the stark white snow, he pioneered the use of the snow den, a carefully excavated and supported snow cave, often reinforced with timber or frozen ice blocks, which provided thermal insulation and a near-invisible firing position that naturally absorbed the muzzle blast. His uniform, now a crude white sheet, allowed him to melt into the landscape. But the ultimate weapon was not the rifle or the technology. It was endurance. Vasily could remain motionless for 48 hours in sub-zero temperatures, relying on techniques learned from a lifetime of winter hunting. Minimal movement, perfect thermal discipline, and an almost meditative focus. The German soldier, trained for the fast-paced, high-mobility blitzkrieg, simply could not match this primal, agrarian endurance. The high ground, the customized rifle, the patient camouflage, all of it culminated in a psychological drain on the German forces. Vasily Petrov had forced the highly mechanized Wehrmacht to slow down, to look up, and to question every shadow, every quiet corner. The technological advantage, ironically, now belonged to the man who used the most basic elements of the earth, snow, shadow, and silence, to defeat the enemy's most advanced detection systems. The pursuit of absolute tactical precision came at an immense personal cost. The scope of the Mosin Nagant became not just a tool for targeting the enemy, but a lens through which Vasily viewed his own disintegrating humanity. The sheer, continuous volume of killing, even for a just cause, began to carve away at the man who was once a simple farmer. In historical accounts of snipers from all sides, a recurring theme is the dehumanization necessary for the task. The distance, the magnification, the selection of a target, it all conspires to turn a man into a piece of geometry, a blur of uniform, a fleeting shape caught in the crosshairs. But for Vasily, the purpose was always personal, making the detachment impossible. Every German soldier he killed was a proxy for the man who had destroyed his family. I looked through the scope and saw their faces, a contemporary sniper journal entry representing Vasily's inner conflict, read, "The shock, the fear, the moment they realized they were chosen. It was too close. The scope makes them clear, but the distance keeps them from feeling real. And yet, I remember the face of the one I killed yesterday, a boy, maybe 16, trying to light a cigarette. The smoke went out, and so did he. I carry that smoke." The psychological stress manifested in physical ways. Vasily suffered from what was known in the field as scope fatigue, a constant, paralyzing tension in the eye and neck muscles from hours of unwavering focus. He experienced terrifying night tremors, reliving the moments of his family's loss and the cold, silent execution of his targets. The profound silence of the kill zone, which he had mastered, became an internal noise, a ringing in his ears that was the sound of 1,000 lost souls. The strategic irony deepened. As his fame grew, so did the isolation. Vasily was the most celebrated hero in his sector, yet he could trust no one completely. His work required absolute secrecy. No one could know his exact position, his next target, or his movements. He became a solitary function of the war machine. He could not share his grief, his fear, or the crushing weight of his mission with anyone, lest he compromise the security of his operation. His only true companionship was with his spotter, if he had one, and his rifle. The Mosin Nagant, once a simple tool, became an extension of his will, cleaned meticulously, its components studied and understood on an atomic level. He understood its recoil, its harmonics, its preference for certain ammunition loads. The gun was the only thing that made sense in a world that had ceased to be rational. The human element of the war was brought into sharp relief during a rare moment of captured German testimony. A radio operator, captured after watching his commanding officer fall to a sniper, described the German side of the psychological battle. The Russians were everywhere, but the ghost, he was different. When he was active, our men would sometimes refuse to carry the wounded back. Not because they were afraid of dying, but because they knew the ghost sometimes leaves a wounded man as bait. To shoot the medic, to shoot the man who helps. It was psychological warfare of the cruelest kind. It forced us to abandon our humanity. He did that to us. Vasily's genius lay in understanding this moral calculus. He knew the cost of human connection and used it as a tactical weapon. He targeted medics, chaplains, and stretcher-bearers not out of malice, but because the loss of these figures broke the enemy's trust in their support system. He forced them into a state of isolated self-reliance, mirroring his own profound loneliness. In this chapter, the narrative pivots away from the glorious kill count and towards the human scar tissue. The quiet farmer had saved countless Soviet lives by eliminating crucial German personnel, but in doing so, he had lost his own self. The vengeful spirit had done its work, but the man was exhausted, a figure of pure, terrifying function, haunted by the clarity of the sights he had seen through the 3.5 times magnification of his scope. The ultimate question was not whether he would survive the war, but whether the man Vasily Petrov could survive the legend of the ghost. The climactic moment of Vasily Petrov's operational career was not a single spectacular shot, but a grueling multi-day engagement during a crucial counter-offensive. The context was the defense of a vital, strategically insignificant hill, Hill 105, that happened to overlook a major German supply artery. The Germans were committed to taking it, the Soviets to holding it. Vasily was positioned not on the hill itself, but on a ridge several kilometers away, perfectly situated to observe and neutralize the German command and heavy weapons crews assembling for the final assault. This was the moment where every piece of his accumulated knowledge, his patience, his technology, his fieldcraft, had to converge flawlessly. The German assault began with a heavy artillery barrage, designed to suppress all resistance. The sound was deafening, the earth trembled, and Vasily's position, though distant, was coated in the debris of the high explosives. This was his opportunity. He did not target the infantry. He focused on the force multipliers. 1. The forward artillery observer, positioned behind a small rock outcrop, directing the barrage. Vasily waited for the brief moment the observer raised his binoculars to confirm the impact zone. 1 shot. Observer down. The German artillery fire immediately became erratic and directionless. 2. The anti-tank gun crew. A newly deployed K-40 anti-tank gun was being dragged into position to neutralize a key Soviet bunker. Vasily took out the gunner first, then the loader, forcing the rest of the crew to scatter. The massive weapon lay inert, a useless piece of metal. 3. The company commander. The final target. The commander was visible for a fleeting second, using a field telephone near a shattered tree. This was a challenging 750-meter shot, requiring perfect compensation for windage, bullet drop, and the heat rising off the scorched earth. Vasily took a single, slow breath, remembering the cold emptiness of his farmstead. The shot was fired. The commander fell instantly. Command and control vanished. The immediate effect was devastating. The German assault, deprived of its eyes, ears, and mind, faltered. The coordinated push became a series of confused, isolated platoons wandering into Soviet fire zones. The hill was held. The tactical loss was measurable, but the psychological blow was crippling. The Germans had been defeated not by superior numbers, but by an individual they could not see or touch. Vasily's final confirmed tally placed him among the most successful snipers in history. He had proven his thesis. The technological superiority of an aggressor can be negated by the tactical precision and sheer will of the defender who understands his own land. He had avenged his family not with a knife or a frantic charge, but with the cold, deliberate calculus of ballistics. The war, however, was a long way from over. Shortly after the climactic battle, Vasily was severely wounded, not by an enemy sniper, but by a mortar shell fragment that shattered his optical nerve. The irony was brutal. The very vision that had made him the ghost was now taken from him, reducing his world to shadow. His career as the deadliest sniper on the front was over. The legacy he left behind was not just a kill count, but a doctrinal revolution. The methods of the ghost, once dismissed as partisan activity, became mandatory curriculum in Soviet sniper schools. His techniques, the use of decoys, the multi-position firing, the targeting of command structure, were adopted globally and remain fundamental to modern sniping doctrine. He turned a necessary individual skill into a strategic pillar of infantry warfare. Vasily Petrov survived the war, albeit sightless. The farmer returned to the land, not to cultivate, but to live with the profound silence of his loss and the chilling echo of his fame. He spent the rest of his life, not as a celebrated hero, but as a man haunted by the weight of what he had done. The vengeance was complete, but the peace remained elusive. The ghost had retired, leaving behind only the terrifying legend and the indelible lesson. In the vast, impersonal crucible of total war, one man, armed with simple tools and infinite resolve, can rewrite the rules of the game. The final act of the story belongs not to the battlefield, but to the silence that followed the last shot. Vasily Petrov's physical wounds were treated, but his true scars were internal and profound. He returned to a world trying to heal itself, a world that was ready to celebrate him as a myth, but utterly incapable of understanding the man. The irony of his journey, the central contradiction of our documentary is this: the man who valued peace and the quiet predictability of nature was forced to become the ultimate instrument of chaos and death. He was a farmer who sowed life, yet he became a reaper of men. His most enduring legacy is the weaponization of simplicity. The German military was an engine of complex engineering, high-speed armor, superior optics, sophisticated communications. Vasily, armed with the rugged basic Mosin Nagant M9130, demonstrated that mastery of the environment and absolute psychological discipline could nullify technological superiority. His rifle, crude by Western standards, became a symbol of resistance, the ultimate proof that the man behind the sight matters more than the machine. They sent their tanks and their jets, a retired Soviet general reflected years later. But Vasily proved that the soil itself could fight back. He showed us that patience is a more effective weapon than any amount of explosives. He turned the forest into a fortress and the ruined city into a firing range. He was the most dangerous type of soldier, the one who knows his home better than his enemy knows his own weapon. The tale of Vasily Petrov became a foundational narrative for the Cold War. It reinforced the idea of the common man, the dedicated citizen, rising to defeat the industrial, technological might of a perceived oppressor. His story was told and retold, often embellished, sometimes simplified, but always serving as a crucial morale booster and a tactical blueprint. Yet the man himself sought only quiet obscurity. The fame was a painful mantle. He saw his actions not through the lens of heroism, but through the crosshairs of necessary vengeance. He had achieved his purpose, but the cost was permanent sight and permanent peace. The true ghost of the Eastern Front was not the sniper who stalked the Germans, but the quiet farmer who was tragically and irrevocably lost that terrible day in 1941. His tale ends where it began, on a patch of earth. But the earth is no longer quiet. It is saturated with memory, fear, and the enduring sound of a single, perfectly aimed rifle shot. The farmer's tragedy gave birth to the legend. And the legend, born of sorrow and forged in fire, proved that the most terrifying force on any battlefield is the one driven by a profound, personal sense of justice. The story of Vasily Petrov is a chilling reminder of the hidden costs and the silent heroes of the Second World War. If you found this journey into the Shadow War compelling, please like this video, share your thoughts on the ethics of vengeance in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the military history that shaped our world.